Shalom Havarim. Hello friends, good to be with you here on this, the third Sunday of Lent 2021. And just a reminder that I have given up telling jokes for Lent, but that doesn't mean we're going to give it up indefinitely. There is a definite end to this, and I am hoping to collect your jokes as well as my own over the next few weeks so that we can celebrate Holy Humor Sunday together on the Sunday following Easter. So please keep track of some jokes, write them down, send them to me. I'll give some information on another date, an email address you can send jokes to. But during Lent, we are working through the biblical covenants. 2 weeks ago, we looked at God's covenant with Noah. It's called the Noahide covenant. Last week, we looked at the covenant that God made with Abraham, the Abrahamic covenant. And today we're going to be looking at God's covenant with Moses. And the word we often give this is we call it the Mosaic Covenant. Now I know the phrase Mosaic can be somewhat confusing because if you have any kind of artistic background, you may be familiar with the artwork, the mosaic, where they take small pieces and they paste them or torch them or something. They put them together in some way, maybe like in a stained glass kind of setting or on a large canvas. You take different pieces of different materials and different colors, and out of those different pieces, you form a larger picture. So you've seen these before, even if you don't know what to call them. I wish I had a picture that I could hold up right here for you now, but I don't. Mosaic is a combination of all these different pieces coming together to make something bigger, something more beautiful. Now, I think this interesting word is helpful for us in the church, the word mosaic. Actually, it's interesting for me because just a couple years ago, one of our local conferences in our denomination, we're a part of Mennonite Church USA, one of our conferences renamed themselves Mosaic Mennonite Conference. And it has nothing to do, well, I shouldn't say nothing to do, but it's not focused on the person of Moses. The reason they call themselves Mosaic Mennonite Conference is because back in 1847, this conference in Pennsylvania divided into two separate conferences. They couldn't get along. I'm not sure what their differences were at the time. So for years, that was 1847, so 150 years plus went by, and these two conferences, they existed side by side, but they did their own thing. And then just in 2019, they voted to officially become one conference again. Now, if you think about Pennsylvania over the last 150, 170 years, a lot of things have changed. A lot of these places that were very rural are now developed. Think of these churches around Pennsylvania, around Philadelphia, and even Lancaster City. These churches have grown and the cities have developed. And now there's all these differences among the people in this conference. There's the people who are rural, and there's people who are urban. There's people who are Anglo. There's people of color and minorities. People with different walks of life, different levels of education, people with different occupations, all coming together, working for a common goal. So they have taken this name, Mosaic Mennonite Conference, to symbolize the way that different people have come together to form one large, beautiful picture. So as we look at this Mosaic covenant, I want us to keep in mind the idea of a mosaic in art, okay? Hold that idea, a mosaic, a combination of a bunch of little pieces to make a bigger, more beautiful picture. All right, so we're looking at this Mosaic covenant, this covenant that God makes with Moses, and we find this in the book of Exodus, and it kind of spans from chapter 19 until 24. So during this time, we find God preparing the people to receive the covenant. Then God gives the covenant to Moses on Mount Sinai. And then in chapter 24, there's this affirmation of the covenant. So Exodus 19, God's giving all these words of preparation for Moses, telling him what to do, who can come to the mountain, who can go there, what they need to do before they receive the law from God. And we read this in verses 3 through 8. I'm going to read a large section of Scripture twice today. Chapter 19, verses 3 through 8. So this is at the Mount Sinai, before they received the law. It says, "Then Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain and said, 'This is what you are to say to the descendants of Jacob, and what you are to tell the people of Israel. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt, and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are my words you are to speak to the Israelites.' So Moses went back and summoned the elders of the people and set before them all the words the Lord had commanded him to speak. The people all responded together, 'We will do everything the Lord has said.'" So after they make this covenant, they make this agreement, then God gives the Torah to Moses. The Torah is the law, and that's usually how we translate it, but it's more accurate to say that the teaching of God. God says, "Keep these teachings and you will be blessed. Not only will you be blessed, you will be my treasured possessions. You will be a kingdom of priests. You will be a holy nation." And remember, the word holy means set aside. Now, if you know your New Testament well, that probably sounds familiar, because in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 9, we read to the church, "But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession." Yeah, holy nations, Batman. That's what my mind comes up with. So all this is going on, and we're going to come back to that holy nation language in Peter at another date. So all this is going on before they receive the Torah. If you do this, if you keep these teachings, then you will be for me a holy nation, a nation of priests, a kingdom set aside. All right, so then Moses receives all the Torah. Then after it's been received, we come to this in chapter 24. Let's jump ahead, verses 4 through 8. Remember, we're passing over about 5 chapters. I should warn you, this is a little gross. It's not for the squeamish of stomach. All right. Anyway, here we go. "He got up early the next morning," that's Moses, "and built an altar at the foot of the mountain, and set up 12 stone pillars representing the 12 tribes of Israel. Then he sent young Israelite men, and they offered burnt offerings and sacrificed young bulls as fellowship offerings to the Lord. Then Moses took half of the blood and put it in bowls. The other half he splashed against the altar. Then he took the book of the covenant and read it to the people. They responded, 'We will do everything the Lord has said. We will obey.' Gonna get grosser yet. Moses then took the blood, sprinkled it on the people, and said, 'This is the blood of the covenant that the Lord has made with you in accordance with all these words.'" Now, many of us, we want to jump from that experience to Jesus' Last Supper with his disciples. And if that's where you are, I'm just going to say pump the brakes a little bit. We're going to come back to that in 2 weeks. But I'm sure all of us are thinking, why so much blood? Why is he dumping out bowls of blood on this altar? Why is he splashing blood on the people? Well, I want to remind you of the language that we use to refer to families and relatives today. How many of you have ever talked about a relative and you say, like, well, their blood? You know, it's a way of talking about how you are related. We share blood with this person. We have this common heredity. You know, our parents are second cousins once removed on my mother's side. That means we share blood with them. Now remember that the Israelites, they all trace their lineage back to a common person. They're all descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And indeed, Jacob is the one whose name was changed to Israel. And when they refer to the people as Israel, it means that they're all a part of this family. Now, I came across an interesting interpretation about why all the blood in this chapter, why they use blood as they affirm this covenant. And this comes from a guy named George Mendenhall. And for all of you UVA fans out there, I do not think that he's a brother to Bronco. No, different family altogether. So again, George Mendenhall, not Bronco, says that these Israelites, they trace their lineage back to this common ancestor, but many of them wouldn't have known each other. Remember that these people are just coming out of Egypt, where they have been slaves for a long period of time. They've been in captivity, and in captivity, they wouldn't have seen each other. They wouldn't have known each other. Remember, Egypt was a big country. They would have been spread around a bit. So as they've grown in number, they've also grown in diversity. They didn't have these family bonds. They didn't have these close relations. They didn't have this opportunity to come together for shared worship. Many of them didn't know about the God of their ancestors. They had forgotten rituals. They had forgotten their practices. All the things that would have made them into a community were lost. So as they went out of Egypt into the wilderness, to this mountain, these people that they were traveling with, they were like strangers to them. Now remember that the sign of the covenant that was given to Abraham was circumcision. This promise that God made with Abraham was passed on from generation to generation through their shared blood. So now in this passage, Moses is taking the blood of these bulls and he's putting it on the altar. And remember first, there's these 12 pillars that are set up there. 12 pillars representing the 12 tribes of Israel. All these people are related. Don't forget that, he's saying. You come from these 12 tribes, these 12 families of Israel. He puts the blood on the altar, and that's a way of symbolically offering the blood up to God, especially when they would burn blood offerings. You know, you turn it into smoke and it rises to the heavens. It's symbolic of raising that up to God. So God is involved in this act of putting the blood on the altar as well. And then Moses splashes the people. I don't know how he did it. He splashes the people with this blood. The same blood that was put on the altar is now splattered on all of the people of Israel. This blood is a reminder of the blood that they share. They are blood relatives to one another. This is a sign of unity. This is a sign of community. He's saying, you were a scattered people. You were separate from one another in Egypt, but now you are a holy nation, a royal priesthood. You are set aside for God. He's saying, look around you. That person you don't know right next to you, that is your blood. Your flesh and blood, your relative, you together are this royal priesthood. So I come back to this image of a mosaic. Yes, what was going on here was the Mosaic Covenant because it involved Moses as their leader. Mosaic, it's the Moses Covenant. But I think it's really interesting that the way we think of a mosaic is that it's a bunch of disparate, separate pieces of something, often just trash or little pieces of paper scattered apart, brought together to form something new, form something beautiful, to form something that God can use. I see a mosaic in the Israelite people coming together to form this holy nation. People of different backgrounds, people of different experiences, brought together for a common purpose, a greater purpose. Just like the Mosaic Mennonite Conference, this is a gathering of people who maybe had never met one another before, who maybe never would have met each other or worked together if it wasn't for the fact that God brought them together to form a beautiful image for a shared purpose. Now, the intuitive among you may guess where we're going with this. And in a couple of weeks, we will talk about the new covenant that Jesus establishes at that Last Supper. But for now, I want you to remember that you have been grafted in to this covenant. You too are part of this royal priesthood, this holy nation. You are a part of the mosaic of God, a bunch of disparate, separate, individual pieces put together to make something more beautiful, put together to serve our Lord. All right, friends, we'll see you next week, and we'll address the Davidic covenant.